Thank you, Dennis, for agreeing to do the interview with the ISPD. And so I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Do you think that the technology for cell-free DNA testing for fetal aneuploidy will ever be improved enough for this to be considered a diagnostic test? If so, how do you anticipate that the biological causes associated with false positive results would be avoided?
Well, I think the cell-free DNA in the mother's plasma is coming from the placenta. And so I think basically there's a biological reason why the DNA is not ever going to be completely the same as that of the fetus product. And so basically, if the technological accuracy becomes extremely high, in the end you'll probably approach that of CES. And so you will never be able to avoid a situation like confined dysentery or some that sort of thing. And so I think that in that regard, if you're talking about anybody, it will still be a screening test about a very accurate one. Yeah.
What is your view on the use of cell-free DNA screening for rare autosomal antibodies other than trisomy 21, 18, and 13, sex chromosome antibodies, and genetic syndromes?
Right. Now, I think that that is basically a statistical question. It's about the positive predictive value of this type of technology. So if you're talking about those subchromosomal antibodies, then I think the rareness of the condition will basically automatically dictate that the positive predictive value will be much less impressive as that for trisomy 21. And yeah, so I think that is basically a statistical question. And theoretically, if you use, for example, random sequencing of the mother's plasma to do such a diagnosis, then statistically you can actually probably do a deeper sequencing to try to enhance the sampling and to try and push it. But I think that you probably would still fall short of the trisomy 21 type of EBV. So I think at the end of the day, it is probably it's a consideration of the clinician plus the counseling of the pregnant woman to try to see whether this is justified in this particular case. Now, but however, if you talk about monogenic disease, then I think there's a different story because I think that some of the very accurate approaches that we and others have described, including the use of thousands of SNPs around a disease gene, and actually those type of technology can actually make it very accurate, and those can actually be used even if the fetal fraction is much lower than what normally would be considered acceptable for NIPT for chromosome screening. So I think for that sort of scenario, actually I think that would likely be the next wave for NIPT, especially for the monogenic disease, and also because the statistics is such that I think those can actually be considered as virtually diagnostic. Yeah.
Do you think those tests would be for just high-risk women with a family history of monogenic disease, or whether it's really for the general public?
Well, I think if you do it on the system that I described, namely by using those SNPs linked to a disease gene, then actually that sort of system would actually need to have an effective family to work because you need to link disease gene to particular polymorphisms. So I think in the foreseeable future, I can see that those will be mainly used actually in families affected by those disorder. But of course, an alternative way to do that is to go straight to the mutation. But then if you go straight to mutation, then you'll be looking at the ratio of mutant alleles and the wild-type alleles in the plasma. And once again, it's a statistical issue, so how many alleles do you have to count before you can get a virtually diagnostic test? So I think that if you try to move it into a general population, or to say in this particular population, say this few genetic disorders are the commonest, and whether you want to do that. I think that would be a health economics and efficacy issue.
So what is your opinion on using cell-free DNA screening for multiple pregnancies, such as twins and triplets?
Actually, our group was the first one to actually describe NIPT for twin pregnancy. And actually, at that time when we were developing technology, we were basically is more driven by curiosity, and then we basically try to look at paternally inherited SNP alleles in the situation of a dizygotic twin versus in the monozygotic. Of course, you can regard that as being just one big baby, so to speak. And that situation is very interesting. So we can basically see different concentration, different alleles. And I think there's still, my group in this area would be more interested in the biology of this phenomenon. For example, we are now looking at a situation where one twin actually die and then see what happened to the clearance pattern of those fetal alleles. Yeah, so that's probably my interest in this area at the moment.
That's very interesting. It's very relevant for our IVF patients as well. So I think we're looking forward to seeing the results. What advances do you foresee in the field of prenatal diagnosis over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think that in the cell-free nucleases field, we have actually recently been combining circulating RNA with single-cell transcriptomics. So I think that is a very interesting area because that allows you to dissect the placenta into different transcriptomes, depends on which cell type, and then correlate the release of that cell type's RNA into the plasma. And that, I think that approach will allow us probably to have a very high resolution way to monitor selected pregnancy conditions, like preeclampsia, maybe preterm birth. And I think that we can probably use a similar approach for, for example, in the future, if you can do single-cell methylomics, so single-cell methyl analysis very reliably, then once again you can correlate that with circulating methylation of the DNA. So I think that is a very interesting area.
So in our lifetime, do you think we can achieve non-invasive prenatal diagnosis for all chromosomal and genetic conditions?
Well, I think that I know that some investigators still are looking at cell-based NIPT, so that will theoretically overcome some of the shortcomings that we have previously discussed about cell-free DNA. The cell-free DNA is basically a cell-free placenta DNA, which, as we described just now for chromosome disorder, probably will never be diagnostic because of biological reason. So assuming that if over the next few years there will be major advances in cell-based NIPT, then the answer to your question is probably yes.
Okay. And how about your view about the use of gene editing, CRISPR technology in humans? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. So I was actually one of the local organizers of the Gene Editing Summit in Hong Kong, so had a chance to firsthand listen to that work, which was rather controversial, presented on genome editing done by this group in China. And so I think that at this juncture, the consensus around the world is that because gene editing technology is still rather new, and you are inevitably will have off-target effects. So at this juncture, we really cannot take the responsibility of making some off-target effect which is going to influence subsequent generations of the baby. And so at this juncture, I think that no scientists really, the consensus is that no scientist should do that at this point. So we are very alarmed that that has been done by this particular group. And also, in this example, I think the choice of the clinical condition is not compelling, right? Because in that case, the father was an HIV carrier, the mother is not. So you can argue that if the mother successfully got pregnant, then the mother herself actually wanted to infect the baby anyway. Right? So that is not a compelling situation. And thirdly, in that particular example, the baby actually doesn't have HIV. So you can argue that this is not really genetic therapy, it is actually genetic enhancement to make this baby potentially have some quote-unquote superhuman type of advantage. So there's another of this ethical issue. So I think that we need to continue to monitor this sort of area and development and review every now and then to see what is the status of fair and then maybe revise our thoughts accordingly.
What do you see as the biggest challenges to future research in clinical diagnosis?
Well, I think there's a lot of different challenges, right? I think technologically it would be very interesting. So my own interest is actually heavily driven by genomic technology like sequencing. So I'm constantly being aware of, for example, there's a limitation of the current generation of genome sequencing. For example, they're still rather expensive, and still many of them actually do not allow you to directly, for example, interrogate the methylation profiles, and they don't allow you to directly sequence RNA, for example. That would be interesting to see what in the future you have some very simple sequences which are relatively cheap, which will allow you at one go sequencing DNA, RNA, let you know about the methylation status, etc. So that would be very interesting. And of course, we are also constantly aware of the data privacy issue. So, for example, even now in NIPT, there are probably like 6 million NIPT done every year. And so it means 6 million women actually have a proportion of the genome sequence. So what happens to that data? For example, whether the patient, the pregnant woman herself, would have the right to access that data, because that is, probably give you as much information as a 23andMe type of screening scenario. And whether the woman can actually take back that information to monitor her health in the future. For example, if subsequently she develop a cancer, then she would like to know what happened in the first sample, whether she has any sign of tumor DNA in the plasma, etc. So I think those are also an issue. And of course, another issue is the implication of AI, artificial intelligence, in this sort of technology. Because currently, to sequence someone's genome is probably relatively easy. I can probably do that less than $1,000 US. But to interpret that will take a lot of work. But AI can probably help and help us to speed that up.
And how far are we from having a system that will help us to do that?
I think probably it's still a long way. I've gone to some conferences in which I've heard of some selected application in which they have done quite well. For example, in the histopathology field, I've looked at I've heard talks about AI system which can circle out the suspicious area on a slide. I've looked at a system in which they can, for example, in a radiograph, chest X-ray can highlight the suspicious area. But I think in genomics, we probably still require a lot of work.
That's very interesting indeed. Everyone's interested in AI right now. 2 more questions. Are you in favor of offering preconception expanded carrier screening to all couples?
I think in some, probably in some regions, right, in which they have a very high rate of like thalassemia. I think in certain areas they have actually done this, like Sardinia, if I understand correctly. And also in some selected population, I think like in the Ashkenazi Jewish population, where there was some screening program. To all, I think, as usual, if you ask a question to all, then usually the safe answer is probably no. Right? I think we need to look at it on a case by case. Basis.
I mean, some people think it's unethical to do it, and of course, we believe in giving women choices.
Yeah, true.
So I agree with you on that. So we have a very personal question. People would like to know how you balance and combine the personal life with such, prolific professional commitments.
Well, I actually look at research as more like a hobby, right, than work. So to me, I probably actually enjoy to think about research. So, and I'm also very fortunate that my wife is also a scientist. So she would understand if suddenly, when we're watching TV and then suddenly I told her that I'm thinking about something and we go back into my room. So to me, it's not that stressful to immerse science as part of my life. And yeah, so in a way, being a scientist is quite a fortunate career choice for me. Yeah, because you can merge interest with what you do.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.